Hello, I. Alright, so I've been a little bit overdue my usual post a week, every 2 weeks. So forgive me, guys. But it's because obviously I am working on my second ebook. So that does take up a lot of my time, but I am really, really excited. And I just want to start off by saying thank you to everybody that has purchased the ebook so far, and to also the ones that have reviewed. I really, really appreciate it as well. And today's topic, all right, just scurrying in there, we're going to talk about STDs because I've been throwing out the questions on my TikTok. If you ain't following my TikTok, make sure you click on the link and follow it. And also, why did I swerve off? It's because I'm not really used to the follow this and that. Guys, I just get straight into it. So you know what? Screw. We're talking about STDs. I've been asking a lot of questions about it. Yeah, trying to get people to sort of understand and see that the narratives that they want to push out there is like narrative number one. Oh, STDs came from humans having sex with animals. And guess who are the humans that they even try and portray out to be like, oh, it's Africans with the HIV thing. They say we slept with monkeys. They gave us HIV. They gave us SIV, and then we converted it somehow into HIV that then got transferred into humans, etc., yeah, into an STD. Because remember, in primates, HIV is not an STD, it's SIV. It's just a virus, and a virus that they've actually built an immune system over now anyway. It doesn't even affect them like that. Do you understand? Anywho's. Or obviously some other people be like, oh, white people love to have sex with animals, and also that I is also false, okay? You don't just catch diseases from animals. Animals have their own diseases. We have our own diseases. When we start sharing diseases between animals, that means something has happened. Either the body itself has been engineered or the disease itself has been engineered, because we have different receptors. So the viruses that affect animals are completely different because the receptors in them are completely different to those of us that are pure human. Aye. Now, with the bodies that have similar receptors to the primates, those will function. But with humans, pure humans, it shouldn't. Okay? So all these narratives that are out there that, they all try to deter you and distract you from the absolute truth. And what is the absolute truth, I? I don't lie on this page. What's the absolute truth? The absolute truth is, number one, these diseases that we have did not exist before pale races came. So all the STDs that you can think of now, every single STD I know, we did not have STDs. They make it out to seem like STDs was a natural evolution. Everything that's very weird and strange that happened in the world, they make it out to seem like there's evolution to it. New domestic animals, it was evolution. It was breeding. It was yeah? New pale races, they evolved into pale races because of the cold climate. When they evolved after the climate, the Earth had already warmed up and was much more warmer then than it is today. So what the hell? Another thing that they tried to say, that when it comes to the STDs, whatever, like those evolved as well, like viruses just evolved. No, I. Everything that they try and say is evolution or whatever is engineered. Okay? So, let's kickstart it. Now, the foundational contradiction. If mainstream biology claims all humans descend from African primates, then viral lineages from primates should appear earliest and most stable in Africa. Yeah? Yet, when we trace the actual recorded emergence of zoonotic sexually transmitted diseases, those crossing from animal to human, the pattern flips. The earliest, most virulent and most mutationally unstable STDs appear not in Africa, but across Eurasia. So this exposes two things. The supposed evolution from African primates narrative doesn't align with the biological evidence. The hybrid populations that emerged in Eurasia were more susceptible to cross-species infections, yeah? And these conditions were unique to them. Now, the HIV-SIV misdirection. While HIV was first detected in Africa, the actual zoonotic transfer SIV to HIV happened under colonial laboratory and testing conditions, not ancestral natural living. The evidence points to medical experiments, blood sampling, and vaccine testing in primate colonies during the 20th century. Artificial fluid transfer, so needles, syringes, organ exposure, yeah, that never existed in pre-colonial settings. Thus, the African monkey to man narrative disguises a scientific origin, not a natural evolutionary one. Because if Africans had genuinely evolved from monkeys, they would have built a long-term immunity to primate viruses, okay? So what I'm basically saying is, how do you want to say like, oh, you know, we evolved from primates and all of this stuff, blah, blah, blah. If we did evolve from primates, yeah, and white people evolved from us, then we should follow the same viral pattern, I and I. Do you understand what I'm saying to you? Yeah? Whatever's in us should be in them, and what's in them should be in us. Aye, aye. However, primates have their own diseases that they've had for all the STDs, yeah? Primate links. There's a primate version of them. Do you understand? It's just not a sexual disease. But there's literally the very same virus. It's just not transferred sexually between monkeys and primates and all of that stuff. But with humans, somehow they engineered it, made it possible that it transferred through into STDs or whatever, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, my point is though, so, what was my point? What was he just discussing? Sorry, guys. Okay, boom. So with the Eurasian races, yeah. So with the Eurasian races, they pop up when the STDs pop up. Okay, if we evolved from primates, like I was saying, that's what my train of thought was. If we evolved from primates, we should have the diseases first. Why do the diseases show up in Eurasians and not in us? Do you understand what I'm saying to you? And remember, we've been here way longer and we're the oldest. Pale races are much more newer. So how on earth do they have all these new virulent STDs and all these new virus diseases, etc., right? That apparently came from primates. Herpes, HIV, they say they all existed in primates first, yeah? Why on earth did Africans go all those 350,000 years not getting the transference from the primates, right? But pale races all of a sudden emerge and they get the transference of the fucking STDs from the primates, right? But there's no primates in Eurasia in the quantities that we have. There's barely any places that have primates. Where the even HIV, where it popped up and showed up, please can you explain to me why it wasn't in the forest in Congo? You know, that's not where it was. It was in the cities. Guess who was there? Guess who was there? The very same Dutch people. Yeah, not Dutch. What is it? What's them people? Is it the Dutch people? The leopards and all of that. I'm pretty sure. Yeah? But anyway, you know what I'm saying. Yeah? Okay. Now, so if Africans had genuinely evolved from monkeys, they would have built a long-term immunity to primate viruses. Instead, the populations that suffered new STDs and blood-borne plagues were Eurasian and hybrid groups whose genetic constitutions were unstable, open to viral incorporation. So this aligns with their record of animal domestication and breeding, their tendency to manipulate nature for survival in, well, all right, so this is what pisses me off, yeah. So obviously with my research, yeah, they love to include like climates and all of that stuff as excuses, but you see me, like, that's why even in my book I break it down. Like, the climate thing, anytime I hear climate excuses or whatever, I don't even listen to it. I know it's already an excuse because they always use climate for the biggest reason, but it's absolute bullshit. Because when you look at the times and the history and the climate, you'll think, okay, so what's going on? You lot said it was mad cold and that's why you lot turned white, but it wasn't cold, was it? The ice age had already long done. So what's going on here? Do you understand what I'm saying to you? So I don't like, but at the same time, I like to also tell you lots, yeah, the information that's out there, like the research that's out there in their words, right? But it frustrates me sometimes because I'm like, bro, the things that they're saying and the excuses that they're using, but I just want to make sure that when I'm saying them, that you lots know that not to take it as soon as you hear climate, as soon as you research, listening to any research and you're thinking, what's going on? And you hear the words climate, just already know it's BS. Okay? All right. So, their appearance of chronic infections, fragility syndromes, and autoimmune expressions are known in older African lineages. So, Africa is the womb of life. Original biospheric harmony. Diseases remained in cyclical balance, no forced mutations. Eurasia is the splice zone. Experimentation, extraction, and mutation. Viral jumping as a reflection of hybrid instability. Biology mirroring spiritual disconnection. So nearly all major zoonotic STDs, so syphilis, gonorrhea, herpes, HPV, chlamydia, and the species and the variants of chlamydia, trace their first aggressive outbreaks to Eurasia. Non-zoonotic or naturally coexisting microbes in Africa only became dangerous after colonial contamination with the transference of it from primates to humans. Because remember, those viruses existed, but they existed in the primates. They were there. I'm not saying that these diseases are new, by the way, guys. I need you to understand, but they have modified and engineered new variants, yeah. But these diseases itself aren't new, okay? They existed, just not in us. We didn't face them. We didn't deal with that issue, yeah. So the human evolution from monkey story collapses when examined through disease patterns. The true biological fall began in splice zones, where humans and animals were unnaturally merged through contact, breeding, and experimentation. The first recorded or reconstruction appearances of Pale population, so post-Neolithics, the steppe, and later colonial Eurasian types, align closely with the first historical waves of virulent STDs, especially syphilis, gonorrhea, and certain herpes strains. Meanwhile, primate-born viral families already existed in nature for tens of thousands of years, even millions, yeah, without ever manifesting as sexually transmitted plagues among indigenous African peoples. So rather than being purely about environment or proximity to animals, this implies something deeper, a biological, susceptible, or genetic instability that emerged with these newer hybridized populations. Okay, so the primate viruses weren't new, the hosts were, yeah. Once those new hosts lineages appeared, so the Pale hybrids, yeah, with altered immune and melanergic, yeah, I can never say the word. Sometimes I feel like I got a stutter. I swear to God, yeah, it's so annoying. If I could only read out loud that I read in my head, it'd be amazing. Melanogenic. Okay, so basically melanogenic coding, yeah. So it was altered, the immune system and their melanin altering, yeah. So they don't have the same melanin as us, or at all, yeah. Some of them. Latent animal viruses could suddenly jump or activate in them. The timing then reflects a biological threshold reached in Eurasian populations rather than behavioral change. So the STDs didn't emerge because humans started behaving differently. They emerged because a new kind of human body appeared, one that could finally host those primate diseases. So why environment alone can't explain it? Animals and humans had lived in proximity in Africa for hundreds of thousands of years without producing the same STD pattern. If mere contact or climate were sufficient, those diseases would be Asian and globally distributed. The fact that the aggressive, transmissible forms coincide with the biological appearance of newer, lighter populations suggests a host-based rather than an environment-based trigger. So basically, yeah, the environment provided the stage, but the new host physiology altered immune receptors, reduced melanin chemistry, and narrower genetic diversity provided the doorway. Older melanated humans were compatible with existing biosystems the newer lineages were not. And pathogens exploited that difference. Okay? Now, skirt. Now, this is a bit in my research where I'm going to tell you no. Absolute cap. Okay? This part. Older melanated humans were compatible with existing biosystems and newer lineages were not. And pathogens exploited the difference. This is another excuse, and don't worry, I'll be breaking it down later as to why that's an excuse. Okay? If we are the oldest, yeah, there should have been, regardless of if they're saying that the newer races, yes, okay, fair enough, they could have been more attacked by those STDs, but we would have had them as well. We would have had to be experiencing them as well. You can't just say that new races appeared and then viruses don't pop out of nowhere. Listen to me very carefully, ain't I? Diseases and stuff, they don't manifest out of nowhere. These lots will love to tell you, will love to make it out seem like things just suddenly break out of nowhere. They just come out of nowhere. Oh my God. But where every time you hear about a new disease, a new outbreak, what else do you always hear right next to it? Labs. Who are those faces that you always hear? So you hear laboratories, you hear experimentations, you hear leaks, accidental exposure, and it's all pale faces. It's always pale faces. Why hasn't there been one African laboratory that's accidentally freaking released or outbreaks a freaking viral disease? How comes? So the very same people that make money, yeah, from the vaccines, yeah, are also the very same people that apparently say that they have to use the excuse of having to create these viruses to be able to create the vaccines for the viruses. But how are you both the problem and the solution, and you also are making money from both the problem and the solution? You're making money by creating the viruses and selling the patents and all of this stuff, whatever, and then you're also making money from freaking selling the cure, apparently, for the vaccines that always need another vaccine, that always needed another vaccine. How many booster shots did you lots get? The ones that got them during COVID. How many? Now COVID is still there. So what's going on? Telling you. Okay. Those depigmentating alleles, yeah, so the pale alleles, they would like to say rises around 5,000 to 4,000 BCE, accelerating through the Bronze Age, so 3,000 BCE onwards. So that's still older than 2,000 to 3,000 years, but far less than Africans' continuous lineages. The spread of these STDs is tied to the steppe and Near Eastern farming expansions, massive populations turnovers that replace much of Europe's earlier black ancestry. So light-skinned Eurasian groups became demographically dominant in the last 5 to 6 millennia. They do not have pre-deep history. All right? So that, again, I don't even know how we normalize that, but I do think it's our ignorance, because obviously it's easy to believe what they say when you haven't done your own research for yourself. And I mean proper going deep and really going deep, because the more topics that you go deep on, you realize that you start to see these same patterns all the time. And when you keep seeing these same patterns, that's when you realize, oh, so there is something going on. There is a reason why they want to keep specifically Africans down. Yeah, they want to make sure, because let's be real, yeah, yes, they want to keep black people down as a whole, but who gets it the most? From a young age, who was you always taught to, you know, African booty scratcher? Who was you always made to look down on? Even with the things of Caribbean, they always showed them. It's so crazy. When I went to, you know what, let's even speak about this. When I went to Jamaica, yeah, I couldn't believe how similar it was to Uganda. I mean, the coloured houses, the children with the coloured school uniforms, just the community vibe, everyone being outside, the poverty as well, but people still smiling, having a good time in poverty. Do you understand what I'm saying? The street dogs, the bad roads. Oh, and I just said to myself, the mad hills, the steep hills and all of that. And I said to myself, wow, guys, and best believe so I stayed in Kingston for a bit, and then I stayed in Ocho Rios in like a gated community, but obviously the gated community was a different thing, yeah, but it's literally reminded me of Uganda. Some places, you know, some of us were behind gates, whatever, and then other people live in even more nicer houses, etc., etc. Like, there's a mad level of wealth in Africa, Like, and remember there, we don't do the whole mortgages, renting, financing cars. No, when you see people out there in their yards, they own it. When you see people driving their cars, they own it, I and I. Do you understand what I'm saying to you? So it's a whole nother thing out there. But then the poverty, the gap is mad, right? So when I was actually, wait, I was like, rah. So in reality, all you remember on TV with the Caribbean is always all these nice beaches and this and that. You never ever used to see poverty, right? But when it came to Africa, they never ever showed you the rich side of Africa. They always showed you the children with the big bellies and the flies all over them and all of this stuff and blah, blah. They never ever would. Do you understand what I'm saying to you? So, and it's crazy because Africans are the ones that are the original, the oldest, and the unadmixed, yeah? So we're the ones that aren't hybrids. Because a lot of the other races, yeah, have mixed, okay? A lot of them have been diluted ages ago. Some much more. The paler you are, the more. It's not the more older you was diluted. No, that's not what it is. It's just that you had more of that pale group in there, and they were able to dead off a majority of the original population. Okay, and what you'll find is the countries where a lot of pale people exist, yeah. Those are the ones where there's more sparse, not a lot of community. What do I mean? Like the proper pale, like look at the Swedens and the whatever, those really cold, like, do you understand what I'm saying to you? Where people weren't really about like that anyway. The numbers that they would have been able to would have had to dead off wouldn't have been that high, as compared to America, like Britain, like the UK. Do you understand what I'm saying to you? And that's why I find it funny that no matter what, how far you go in history, black people, we've always been here. These lots would like to make it seem as if to say that we somehow arrived on boats or whatever. We arrived differently, and because they loved, the first generation, second generation. But when you look back in history, we've always been here. It's just that it's just mad that we've just been either the majority, well, the only, then we was the majority, then we turned into the minority, then barely there, then minority again, then now we're reclaiming. We are reclaiming, all right? But I would definitely like to say that try not to focus too much on building down these sides or outside of Africa, because I promise you there's something going on. Africa is heaven. I don't know what's going on outside of Africa, but even structurally, right? Our plains, the plains of Africa, the earth plains, we're not on no, you know what I mean? That's why we don't get major earth like disasters and all of that stuff, because our tectonic plates, they're not moving like that. Do you understand what I'm saying to you? Whereas outside of Africa, it's a whole nother thing. Just bare problems, always problems, So it makes me think, like, to those of us, our ancestors that left Africa and decided to, build everywhere else, and we built huge, great, amazing communities that flourished and, but they were dealing with a lot of thingies as well, though. A lot of resets outside of Africa. And I've wondered, why is it always outside of Africa? But we've also had our resets inside of Africa. It's just that they weren't as pale then. Yeah, so we had it with the Arabs, the first groups. Yeah. So people don't really know that. People don't tend to focus on the fact that Arab colonized Africa way before the Europeans did. Now, sorry, we scuffled a little bit there, guys, but let's continue. Now, the earliest recognizable cases of genital herpes disease concentrated in reproductive tissue and transmitted sexually doesn't appear until the last few thousand years, almost entirely in Eurasian populations. African populations, show antibodies to many herpes viruses, HSV1, like simian equivalents, etc., but not evidence of the ancient HSV2 types epidemic. The modern HSV2 diversity is heavily Eurasian, which means the aggressive human-to-human lineage expanded there. And even with the HSV1, like simian equivalents, I'm going to break that down further as well. And you'll realize even that, where its origin actually lies, So like I said, STDs, sexually transmitted diseases, did not exist in African populations before, okay? But every single last one of them, you will trace it back to Eurasian origins. So, Researchers anchor the origin of HSV2 to Africa because its ancestor came from an African primate. Yet, every data point for large-scale human infection is Eurasian and very recent. So the transfer from primates and the actual genital disease are two different events. The first is a theoretical zoonotic contact tens of thousands of years ago. The second is a later amplification of that virus into a stable, sexually transmitted lineage, an event that the data placed within the same time window as the rise of later Eurasian populations. There's no actual evidence that Asian African humans suffered from or transmitted a persistent genital herpes infection. There is evidence that modern HSV2 strains diversified and spread only after the emergence of newer, lighter Eurasian populations a few thousand years ago. Therefore, the idea that HSV2 existed in African populations, so genital herpes, existed in African populations for tens of thousands of years as a genital infection is not supported. The data only supports that a distant ancestor of HSV2 once infected a primate species in Africa. Okay? So, for hundreds of millennia, humans in Africa coexisted with primates, livestock, and wild fauna at levels of contact far greater than later Eurasian farmers ever had. If similar proximity or climate stress were even enough, zoonotic STDs should have arisen there first and long persisted there. Yet, the fossil, genetic, and paleopathological evidence shows no widespread venereal lesions or endemic sexually transmitted infections in early Africa remains. So, something other than the environment or behavior must have determined why viruses didn't cross the species boundary in that setting. Now, this is the part that I really need you guys to listen very carefully. To anybody that thinks, oh, it's because they had sex with the animals, please, this is the part I need you to listen to very carefully so I can really get you to understand that. No, I know you would love that to be the thing because, it's wild and weird and that's so nasty, but no, let's talk about science. Let's talk about facts, okay? Let's make sure this is still recording as well. Damn, we 27 minutes in. All right, guys. So we're still recording. We're still on. Now, a virus can only establish itself if human cells offer the right entry receptors. Internal chemistry and immune response profile. When those change through mutation, hybridization, or the immune architecture also changes. So basically, when I made a mistake here, sorry guys. When those change through mutation, hybridization, or hybridization, the immune architecture also changes. Older African lineages retained broad-spectrum immunity and co-adaptation with local microbes. Their biology had reached equilibrium with surrounding ecosystems. Newer Eurasian lineages underwent strong selection and genetic narrowing. Certain immune gene families, especially HLA and interferon pathway genes, show reduced diversity and different receptor configurations. This would make those hosts more novel and vulnerable to existing animal viruses. Now, that's one excuse. But I'll say it's an excuse. And why I say it's an excuse is I want to give you lots more evidence, first of all. Because that wouldn't be enough, because that alone can't create, remember, a new disease. It doesn't matter if your immune system is weak, Okay, like somebody tried to say, oh, it's incest is what caused STDs. You don't get an STD from having sex with your family member. You get an STD if you have sex with somebody who has the STD and it transferred over to you. It doesn't matter if you don't have sex with your partner, with your sibling, and you have sex with a stranger that has an STD, you're going to catch an STD. But if you have sex with your brother and they don't have an STD, you're not going to catch an STD. Do you understand what I'm saying to you? So just like you're not going to catch a disease through an act, So that excuse makes it out to seem like, oh, because white people's immune systems is different, you know, that's why they got their STDs or whatever. But if that was the case, and because they're weak, then why did we get it? Right? Why could they transfer it over to us if we was just so strong? Because clearly it wiped us out as well. Like HIV wiped us out in numbers. So make it make sense, I. Alright. Now, the major rewiring of pigmentation, vitamin D metabolism, and immune response genes occurs during the last, well, they always like to say 64,000 years, but I always say 1 to 2,000 years, yeah, max. That is the same window when depigmentated Eurasian groups expand demographically and genomic clocks for viral and STDs start ticking. The coincidence suggests that what changed was not the climate, but the human template itself, an altered biochemistry that allowed previously neutral microbes to become pathogenic and sexually transmissible. Now, every virus needs a lock and key. This is the most important part. Please listen up, guys, yeah? A virus can't just enter any cell. It has to attach to a specific receptor on the cell's membrane. That receptor acts like a lock, and the virus's attachment protein is the key. If the shape or chemistry of the receptor doesn't match, the virus can't enter. Primates already had their own lock and keys. Herpes, papilloma, and treponemal microbes were well adapted to primate biology. So papilloma and treponemal, those are all the trichomonas, the chlamydia, yeah? So those versions were often mild or dormant because they co-evolved with the hosts, okay? So in the primates. For a jump to humans to work, a near match had to appear. If a human lineage evolved or mutated receptors that resembled the primate version closely enough, the virus could finally unlock the door. Once it's inside, it could adapt rapidly to the new host and become stable as a human strain. That's why the timing matters. For most of human history, Africa's population's cell receptors were not compatible enough, so the microbes stayed confined to primates. However, when later populations with altered immune gene and receptor profiles appeared, some of those receptors were the same as the primate ones, giving viruses an entry point. The result, new persistent infections that didn't exist before. But my thing is this, guys, that I want you to think about. How could it just be that new populations happen to have similar receptors to primates for it to attach to, for them to have the sexual diseases? How? And if that was the case, why didn't it transfer into humans? Yeah, the same way that it's in the primates. Why did it have to be a sexually transmitted disease? Why did they make it sexual? And then why did they go around spreading their sex and their conquest and raping all the women and all of that stuff? Why did they go around spreading their diseases? How many populations, indigenous populations, are spoken about the white man coming and bringing disease? And not just the white, I'm talking about the pale populations, all pale populations, yeah? Now, when scientists say that HIV crossed from chimpanzees to humans many times, they're referring to a virological reconstruction based on genetic comparisons between human and Chinese human and chimpanzee viruses, not a record of observed events. Yeah? So, chimpanzees SIV as the ancestor. Chimpanzees carry a virus called SIV-CPZ, so the simian immune deficiency virus. When researchers compared its genome with HIV-1, the sequences were about 99% similar in certain regions. That genetic closeness suggests that HIV-1 ultimately derived from an SIV-like virus. And also another thing, guys, don't you think it's weird? Huh? And this is what I'm mentioning in my book as well. Don't you think it's weird that all these viruses, yeah, that we have are seemingly found only in domesticated animals or animals that have a lot of contact with humans? Very strange. Very strange. Yeah? Cats cats have their own HIV thing as well, and all of this stuff, and do you get what I mean? Like, even weird things like dogs being like bleeding and having periods. Why? Like, do you get what I mean? Like, I feel like all these domesticated animals have these very, like, yeah, anyway, continuing on. So, crossing, independent spillovers. When they build family trees of viruses, they find several distinct branches. HIV-1 groups, M, N, O, and P. Each branch is mostly closely related to a slightly different SIV strain. The simplest explanation is that at different times, viruses from infected apes entered humans and adapted separately. Those inferred introductions, not witnessed events, are what researchers call crossings. Molecular clock estimates place those spillovers within the last few centuries. But, yet again, these are statistical guesses based on mutation rates, not direct evidence of what or how transmission happened. No one can point to an exact moment or mechanism. So this is the hidden bias exposed. Scientific literature often softens or obscures this pattern through inconsistent framing. Human-only diseases later turn out to have animal cousins once new sequencing is done. For instance, chlamydia, trichotomia. Terms like human adaptation replace the more accurate zoonotic lineage. The narrative defaults to humans caught this from animals, rather than considering that both could share pale populations and primates could share genetic similarities, or that certain populations were more susceptible. Thus, the distinction between human evolution and animal hybridization gets blurred to preserve a linear Africa to Eurasian origin story. Now, every major STD, because they were selling nearly, but it's not nearly, because when I broke down every single last one of them, it is all. But obviously, they'll never want to say that. Why won't they ever want to say that? Because it makes it sound better, right? Now, every major STD, syphilis, gonorrhea, herpes, HPV, HIV, chlamydia, trichomonas, has a zoonotic or hybrid lineage. BV and yeast infections are internal human imbalances, not zoonotic. The killer class of STD clusters overwhelmingly in post-African hybrid contact regions. That pattern directly contradicts the all humans evolved from primates. Simplification. If that were true, these viruses should have been ancient, benign, and long neutralized in African populations. Instead, they manifest later in regions of mixed ancestry and animal proximity aligning with historical and genetic splice zone activity. If pathogens were already encoded harmlessly in primate biology and only became destructive once human cell structures changed, then disease is a marker of divergence, not origin. The emergence of these STDs maps directly onto the appearance of new human phenotypes with altered cellular compatibility. It suggests that the disease evolution mirrors human hybrid evolution. Chlamydia trachomatis. So, a bacterial pathogen that infects the epithelial cells of the genital tract, eyes, and occasionally the throat. It's responsible for the world's most common bacterial STD. Okay? Bear with me one moment, guys. Alright. Chlamydia is part of the large bacterial family. Many species in that family infect animals, birds, cats, koalas, and primates. But Chlamydia trachomatis is a human-adapted offshoot. Genetic analysis shows that it diverged from a common ancestor that once infected multiple species, but over time it specialized for the human cell environment. That's why scientists call it obligate intracellular. It can only live and reproduce inside human cells now. It doesn't have a current animal reservoir that spreads the human STD form, but it shares the ancestry with animal strains such as parrot fever and also sea caviar found in guinea pigs. So the organism's family lineage is zoonotic, but the modern STD strain isn't caught from animals. It circulates purely between humans and is sustained by human biology. So the original, because these men, like I said, these men love to play with their diseases. Yeah? Like, come on, guys. You man pop up and all of a sudden these new diseases are coming up, these new strains that never infected us, but you man seem to have them. How? Trichomonas. I always call it trichomonas. Okay, whatever. That trichomonas, yeah? Now, a single-celled protozoan parasite that lives in a urogenital tract and spreads through sexual contact. It's not a bacterium or virus, but a flagellated protozoan, a small animal-like cell with whip-like tails used for movement. Other primates such as chimpanzees and gorillas carry near identical species, and genetic studies suggest a shared ancestral form that infected early hominids and apes. So they're saying that like Neanderthals apparently had it as well. Yeah, the human strain evolved separately enough that it can only survive in human genitals conditions, not in animals today. Unlike bacterial STDs, trichomonas infections are non-lethal but cause discomfort, irritation, and inflammation that can increase vulnerability to other infections. So while the current T. vaginis strain is human-specific, it descends from a lineage that co-evolved with primates. It's more of a very old microbe, okay? Now, the wider chlamydia family. Ancient DNA from animal remains showed that these pathogens were widespread in livestock and wild birds throughout Eurasia by at least the Bronze and Iron Ages. So the Chlamydiaceae family includes many species that infect animals, birds, so the C. pistaci, and sheep, C. abortus, and koalas, C. pecorum, yeah, and others. So the family is old, but each host species tends to carry its own specialized strain. That background matters because the human lineage almost certainly arose from one of those animal adapted branches, but then circulated entirely within human communities. So the transition to genital infection. The genital or sexually transmitted variants likely diverged from ocular strains in densely populated urban settings during the late classical or early medieval periods, so roughly 500 to 1000 CE. The first recognizable descriptions of genital discharge syndromes that fit chlamydia occur in medieval Europe and Middle Eastern medical texts, often confused with gonorrhea because both cause similar symptoms. No specific term for chlamydia existed. It was grouped under the clap or urethral running. Urban Eurasian and Mediterranean centers, so Byzantium and Islamic Caliphate cities, and medieval Europe, where hygiene, close quarters, and continuous sexual contact sustained the pathogen. So, when the modern genital strain of chlamydia trachomatis actually appears in history and begins spreading globally, it expands roughly from around 1000 to 1700 CE. So Europe as the first stronghold, 1000 to 1400 CE. Europe and the Near East enter a phase of denser urban living, crusades, and inter-regional trade. Physicians described this disease called running of the reins, or GLEAT, referring to chronic painless urethral discharge in men and pelvic pain in women. GLEAT doesn't fit gonorrhea, which burns and causes pus, or syphilis, which ulcerates. It matches the silent, persistent infection pattern of modern chlamydia. So no microscope existed yet, so the agent was invisible, but the symptom complex appears consistently from the 11th century onwards. By the High Middle Ages, C. trachomatis serovars D to K, the genital types, were already circulating through European and Mediterranean population. Now, the acceleration during the Renaissance and colonial era, so 1400 to 1700 CE. Major port cities Venice, Lisbon, Seville, London had large sex trades, servicing sailors and merchants. Persistent running diseases are noted in municipal health records. Global navigation and empire. The same marine type routes carried venereal infections to every new colony. Portuguese and Spanish voyages spread European venereal complexes to West Africa, India, and the Americas. Missionary and military writings from the 1500s to 1600s describe identical non-syphilitic discharges among local populations soon after contact. The clap and venereal flux were umbrella terms. Physicians thought both men and women suffered the same disorder transmitted through immoderate lust. In reality, the clap, gonorrhea, and chlamydia were coexisting but indistinguishable infections. So this is the period when the modern genital chlamydia becomes global and endemic, piggybacking on colonial and trade expansion. Bear me one moment, guys. Gotta make sure we're still recording. Okay. I got a new phone, but I still be paranoid that it's gonna cut off sometimes because I'll be like, is my battery dying? And because sometimes I've been on, like 30 minutes past, and it had already stopped recording 30 minutes ago, so I was just sat here. Anyway, 18th century doctors start separating blenorrhea, so mucus discharge without sores, from lues venera, so syphilis. The mild recurrent form of urethral discharge is now recognized as its own category. Early microscopes reveal inclusion bodies in conjunctiva and genital secretions, confirming a unique agent, what we later named chlamydia trachomatis. By the late 1700s, the same biological strain that circulates today was already fully established in Europe and its colonies. So, in Western Europe, the route of entry was endemic, parish and military hospital notes of chronic flux. In Mediterranean and North Africa, it was the Crusades and the Ottoman trade. Medical writings in Arabic and Latin describe persistent inflammation of the urine passage. And in West Africa and Americas, it came from the Portuguese and Spanish routes. Missionary diaries record identical symptoms soon after European contact. South and East Asia, it came from the Indian Ocean trade. Dutch and Portuguese colonial doctors describe white discharge in both sexes. So, the time of emergence is roughly 1000 to 1300 CE. The global spread 1400 to 1000 CE via trade, colonization, and military movement. Clinical identity is the C. trachomatis. Key distinction: before this period, there is no firm record of such a chronic or asymptomatic genital infection, meaning so basically going from one to another. So it was mainly, STDs are mainly men transferring into women, even in back in those days. So that's what they mean by asymptomatic. So one way. Conclusion is, the modern sexually transmitted form of chlamydia is a late medieval creation that became global during early empire, not an Asian, African, or primal disease. Here's what the urban density explanation actually rests on, and why it can be misleading when implied too broadly. And this is what I was talking about before. This is one of my excuses that I hate as well. Alongside the climate thing, there's a whole thing of to do with urban overpopulation, this and that. That's why disease don't just come out of nowhere. Yes, things can make them spread faster and can cause them to spread, but it doesn't just come out of nowhere. Don't let anybody fool you, I. Yeah? So even if it was all stuck here, packed like a freaking of sardines, as long as nobody's ill, we'll be fine. When one person gets ill, though, that's when everything spreads. Aye. Now, by By crediting urban density as the decisive factor, the model subtly removes biological change in the host from the equation. It treats disease emergence as purely social crowding, sanitation, rather than asking whether new populations had different cellular or immune profiles that made them susceptible. That's a scientific blind spot created by the wish to keep all humans biologically interchangeable in modern theory, and we aren't. Okay, we're not, guys. We're not the same. Now, because historical DNA survives better in dry, cold urban sites, most of the available samples are from cities. So the claim that forest communities didn't sustain infections partly arise from the lack of preserved material. Boom. Bias. Why is that sentence biased? Because I told you, anytime that they say anything about climate, dry this, or whatever, it's just an excuse. It's just an excuse. Just completely don't even bother with the noise, because they want to say that disease came from primates, yet none of them come from forest communities, they came from the cities. And then they want to say it's because the cities were overpopulated. If it was because the cities were overpopulated, what about the cities that were overpopulated, that didn't have white people in it, and they didn't get no diseases? But then all of a sudden, even cities that weren't overpopulated at first, yeah, as soon as the white people come, all of a sudden diseases are there. The fucking common denominator is white people. It's not climate. It's not cities. It's not none of that. Okay. Jesus Christ. Now, infections don't just die out in small groups. Many pathogens can persist at low levels or in animal reservoirs. Yeah. The urban density rule works for acute, short immune diseases, measles, but not for chronic ones like herpes, HPV, or chlamydia, which can persist silently for years. So applying the same logic to all diseases ignores these biological differences. Yeah. So the framework implicitly centers Europe as the birthplace of modern disease evolution. Yeah. As if to say, like, oh, it's because it's the cities that creates it. But it's not the cities, it's the actual biology. Yeah. Now, when academic epidemiology talks about bottlenecks, it usually means a sharp drop in population size that reduces. This is another one excuse that I fucking hate, and I'm going to break it down to you exactly why I hate the genetics excuse of bottlenecks. Yeah. Now, it usually means a sharp drop in population size that reduces genetic or microbial diversity. The contradiction arises because the term is used differently depending on who the population is. So, for Eurasia, bottlenecks are said to help diseases thrive. The reason is that the reduced immune diversity lets pathogens spread quickly and become endemic. For indigenous or small tropical groups, bottlenecks are said to prevent disease persistence because there aren't enough hosts. Same word, opposite effect, used to fit whichever outcome supports their narrative. Yeah. So if we narrow the question to when were modern sexually transmitted Trichomonas vaginalis, the form that circulates today, actually appears, here's the clock that you'll see. Okay. So now this is what the whatever one, yeah. Another STD. So this disease also appeared 1500 to 1000 CE in the Mediterranean, Europe. All right. Medieval medical texts in Greek, Arabic, and later Latin describe a disease in women producing frothy, foul-smelling discharge and genital irritation without ulcers. Those accounts don't fit gonorrhea or chlamydia, which affects both sexes equally and have different symptoms, but do match modern trichomonas almost line for line. By the late Middle Ages, similar whitish flux descriptions appear in European gynecological manuals and monastery infirmaries records. This places the human-specific parasite in recognizable form in the Eastern Mediterranean or Europe urban world of 2nd millennium CE. So in the late 1800s to the early 1900s, European microscopists first observed the vibrating animalcules in the vaginal fluid. Listen to that as well. they first observed the vibrating animalcules in the vaginal fluid. Why is it there? Who knows? In 1894, Alfred Don names the organism Trichomonas vaginalis in Paris. Yeah. 1900s culturing confirms it is a distinct protozoan unrelated to bacteria or fungi, and that it dies quickly outside the human genital environment. Also strange. From then to now, its cell structure and genetical profile has remained essentially the same, indicating that the current strain had already stabilized before the 19th century. Now, I want to get to the more juicier parts of my research before we get to an hour. Because this whole... Okay, boom. All right. Yeah. Perfect. All right. Now, the earliest clinical descriptions and the later laboratory confirmations both show that women were the first and most notable affected group by chlamydia trachomatis in its modern form. So, when physicians describe what we now recognize as chlamydia, they nearly always wrote about female symptoms: persistent, painless discharge, pelvic heaviness, infertility, and miscarriage. The terms used were whites, florus albus, or leucorrhea. These were viewed as disorders of female humors or seed, not infections. Can you imagine? Men were mentioned only when they had to be burning urination, and even the writers assumed it was another disease, so the clap or gonorrhea. i.e. gonorrhea. In short, the infection's first visible medical identity was a female reproductive ailment. Yeah. Even today, roughly 2/3 of new chlamydia cases worldwide are in women. Women are 2 to 3 times more likely to have long-term complications. Men remain the larger pool of silent carriers. So the modern gender skew is ancient. It simply took centuries for medicine to recognize the infection as one pathogen affecting both sexes. So now, in my research, what I found was, I started to put 2 and 2 together. I was like, wait, hold on a minute. It just proves my point even more that pale males were the first to arrive. I don't know. There's no women. There's no pale mothers, guys. You lot didn't come out from a pale womb. There is no pale mother. That's why they say all of you lot's trace. That's why they say the whole thing about all you lot's trace to men, the Eve gene, right? Why do they trace you back to try to link you back to the African womb? Why? Why do they do that? Because you're not linked to it. Because you're not linked to any womb. You're linked to the lab. Because males came first. As soon as you see a genetic thing, then men come first, you already know what one. And just do your research for yourself. See if you can find. Look, they say the steppe people are the first pale races. The steppe, yeah? Ask where their mothers were. Trace the lineage, the mitochondrial DNA of the steppe. And you're going to see it's all black women. It's all African mitochondrial DNA. So how the hell do new pale genes come along? The Y lines, new pale Y lines come, but the mitochondrial DNA is exactly the same. And remember, the men are the silent carriers. Listen to my research. The males are the silent carriers. The women were getting affected way more. Do you understand what I'm saying to you? And why do you think that is? Because the women were humans, pure. They hadn't dealt with these diseases before. When these men were raping them, doing whatever, they were transferring diseases to them that their bodies had no immune for. So it was attacking them like mad. Now, ancient DNA studies confirm repeated male-biased migrations in Eurasia after 3000 BCE. Y chromosome lineages such as R1b, R1a, and J expand rapidly, while local maternal lineages largely persisted. Wherever those expansions occurred, archaeology also show large-scale warfare, slavery, and concubinage. Those conditions these spread any sexually transmitted pathogen that already existed in the pale populations. So when European empires later reached Africa and the Americas, colonial and slave trade records document sharp rises in venereal disease among women who had little power to refuse sex or medical care. So, STD prevalence often tracks with male conquest and power asymmetry. Male-biased migration, so the steppe, late imperial and colonial expansions, are traced through Y chromosome data. That same demographic pattern creates a network of mobile men interacting with many women in rapid succession. So this amplified the STD that those men already hosted. Pathogen persistence depends on a host reservoir. A disease like syphilis, gonorrhea, or chlamydia can remain silent in men for months or years, allowing them to act as asymptomatic carriers. So that one, remember when I said the one way, yeah? So men into women. Once these men reach new populations, transmission can look like a sudden outbreak, even though the infection pre-existed in the source group. Rape, slavery, and concubinage didn't invent the microbes, okay? Remember, rape, slavery, and concubinage didn't invent the microbes. That's not how, you can't just invent new diseases. They just multiplied the exposure. The pattern of new female infections following conquest therefore points back to the conquerors as the initial reservoir. So this is the chain. Pre-existing infection within the expanding white pale male population, coercive sexual contact during expansion leads to epidemic among newly exposed women. Okay? And that's it. That's where we're going to stop here with my research. I should be an hour in. So I'm going to go much, much further in on my book, etc. And I'm also going to be breaking down other stuff. Like, I'm going to be breaking down the whole soul thing. You know, some people have a soul, some people don't. And what's that soul thing that I'm talking about? That consciousness, that awareness, yeah, that self-awareness. I really, really think people will, like, be mind shocked to really start thinking and being like, you know what? Like, yo, what the hell is going on? And I hope this STD thing can also, because come on, guys, don't piss me off. Like, seriously, not on even on a joke, not, can feel that, you know when you can feel like your gel. Not on a joke thing, not on a play thing, but this is serious thing, yeah. It's actually a mad thing, guys. Like, it's one or two things. It's either these men engineered all of the diseases, all of the STDs, etc., yeah, and inserted it into the male populations and then let them expand, or they already existed in those male populations because they were spliced from primate DNA, and this is why they already appear simultaneously. As soon as pale races appear, they appear alongside as well, which to me makes the most sense. But both of them make sense to me. Why? Because I know that they've been engineering new strains, etc. as well. Do you understand what I'm saying to you? But let me know what you think. Come on. Like, share, comment, subscribe. Make sure you share, guys. Make sure you share. Come on, let's get the truth out there. Burn all of this fake news that they want to teach us. At this day and age, 2025, with all the access that we've got, there is no excuse, I and I, to be ignorant. There is no excuse, I and I, to be stupid. There's no excuse, I and I, to be asleep. There's no excuse to be uneducated, I and I. Please, I beg. I beg. But I just want to show a lot of love and appreciation to anybody that, you know, sits and watches my long ass videos and stays tuned in. I appreciate you so much for making it all the way to the end. I'm giving you a fat hug, squashing you between my bosoms, giving you that chest to chest love, yeah. Anyways, I